Churches are very different than they were 100 years ago. It's still a pastor's job to lead a congregation through all of those changes and help them evolve and survive. Recently, I was able to sit down with Pastor Bob Zimmerman. Bob was a preacher way back in the 50s and pastored for decades. I also sat down with Pastor Jonette Gay, our current pastor here at Otterbein. It's interesting to hear about their different perspectives and how things have changed over time. I was also very curious about how they really heard that formal call to ministry.
I guess what I can say is there was no angel visitants or opening heaven or any emotional experience that made me decide. It was a gradual process from the time I was growing up as a child through the church and active in the church, and my whole involvement in groups within the college and friends who encouraged me along that way, that I finally decided I should do it.
The church was a huge part of my life growing up, especially youth years, teenage years, but all through when my mother would get the 5 kids in the car and we would sing on the way to church. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. It was not only a safe place, it helped me see transcendence, or that there are things greater than even the problem du jour. And I really found it a place that I could think.
Bob and Jonette both pursued different interests at the beginning of their ministerial journeys. These other interests especially help form their pastoral styles.
They may be living out God's call, and yet they're the wrong gender. Yes, there are things that make us angry. There are reasons for anger. There's falsehood that is accepted as normal.
I did not take a ministerial course in college. I majored in sociology and history. Took a few courses, one in logic and another one in philosophy. Took 1 year of Greek in college, which helped me in some in seminary. But other than that, I took no ministerial courses. Maybe that's why I was kind of a rebel when I was in the ministry.
I loved sermons. When the pastor that came, it was a small church, and we had a lot of very kind people, but they were not particularly educated until we had one who had a physics degree before he became a minister, and he really challenged us. And when I was about 14 years old, I wrote him a letter about the sermon, and it scared him because that was the first time he realized somebody was listening. And then I wrote a letter almost every Sunday after the sermon because I was so interested in sermons. And he one day preached a sermon. I was a senior in high school and thinking about college and what I would do, and he preached a sermon. It was Samuel and Eli. It's a call story, and that, as he talked about what it looks like to be called into the ministry, I thought, wow, that's really everything he's saying sounds like me. He said, I'm just saying this in case there's anyone out there who may be experiencing a call and you don't know what it is. But then I thought, can't be me because I'm a woman. Looked up at the rafters and I thought, what will I major in school? I guess my mother was a teacher. I'll be a teacher. And even though in 1956, this was about 22 years after women were ordained. Women were first ordained in the Methodist Church in 1956, but it wasn't in my heart, and I had never seen a woman pastor, so I thought, can't be me. I'll just be a teacher.
When Bob started working in the 50s, society was very different than when Jonette started some 60 years later. But in their own way, each learned what being a pastor is really all about.
When I wrote my thesis in seminary, I wrote it on slavery in the Evangelical United Brethren Church, which is what I was in at that time, and how they dealt with the issue. And by doing this, I went back through the newsletters of the time during the Civil War, previous to that. And the big issues that were often in those newsletters is, should people wear lipstick or dance or play cards? I mean, the church too often takes a stand of what it's against instead of stating what it's for.
There was an evolution of what it meant to be a pastor. And when I first graduated from seminary, I had all the answers and I was just ready to give people the answers. And then I found out they don't care what I know. And that shook me a little. And then I had to realize there's a whole lot more to their faith than just giving them information.
Bob and Jonette were able to sit down and chat about their experiences. They both agreed that change is always needed in the church.
Someone said, retool or retire. And maybe that's what I have to do now is retool because things are different. And I just wondered if there was something that evolved in you in ministry and something that was consistent and doesn't change when you think of the message of the church or the minister's message.
Oh, I think yes. If you don't change with the time, you're dead. I mean, at least you have to block out. And if you want to live and minister to the time, you have to keep up with the changes socially, scientifically, economically. You've got to be aware of what's going on in the world as well as what's going on in the church. And you need to make sure the church keeps up with what's going on, what the issues are. And the issues have changed through the years. And some of what's taken place is for the good and some for the not so good.
Even 600 years before the coming of Christ, the prophet Jeremiah was asked, "Does God still speak?" He replied confidently, "Yes, he does." Pastor Jonette Gay and Pastor Bob Zimmerman both heard that call. They gradually came to realize that they wanted to formally lead a church. Although they did it at different time periods and they faced different challenges, the constant remains that God still speaks and God still loves.